The 90s were a magical time filled with mom jeans, frosted tips, and of course, boy bands. The phenomenon took the music industry by storm and dominated pop culture for much of the decade, but not many people know about the mastermind behind it all. His name is Lou Pearlman, and he was responsible for the most iconic boy bands of all time. But there was an ugly side to the glitz and glam of the boy band craze. While Pearlman was bringing together groups such as the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, he was also engineering the longest-running Ponzi scheme in U.S. history. Just how did Lou Pearlman keep his billion-dollar crimes hidden for so long? Let's start at the beginning. Long before Pearlman became one of the most influential figures in the 90s music scene, Lou was an only child growing up in Flushing, New York. He spent a lot of his time with his childhood best friend Alan Gross. The two did everything together, but their favorite activity was watching the blimps land and take off from Flushing Airport, located across the street from Lou's childhood home. It was here that Lou's fascination with aviation, and more specifically with blimps, began. In high school, the two friends took advantage of their position at the school newspaper to hitch a ride on a blimp for the very first time. As his early years progressed, another interest entirely started to take shape in Pearlman's life. Putting aviation to the side for a bit, he decided to focus on music. It was only natural for Pearlman to take the music business, as he just so happened to be the first cousin of music legend Art Garfunkel, one half of the iconic folk rock duo Simon and Garfunkel. His big cousin was a rich and famous musician, and he wanted that for himself too. His foray into the music biz started when he was a teenage band manager. Humble beginnings indeed for the eventual creator of the 90s most legendary pop groups, but it was far from easy at first. Pearlman's lack of early success forced him to shift gears back to aviation. As a freshman at Queens College, Pearlman's class projects involved creating a hypothetical business plan. He envisioned a helicopter taxi company that flew people around New York City. He must have gotten a good grade on that project because he took the idea and ran with it. He officially started the business in the late 70s with just a single helicopter. Pearlman was beginning to flex his business muscles at this point. The helicopter taxi service was a good start, but ever since he was a young kid, it was blimps that he was most passionate about, and that had not changed. He befriended a German businessman named Theodor Rufenkemper and started picking his brain about the production and operation of blimps. He even flew out to West Germany to learn in Theodor's blimp facilities firsthand. Pearlman took all the knowledge and expertise he had absorbed and used it to launch his very first blimp venture. He started Airship Enterprises Limited and planned to lease blimps to various companies to advertise their brands. There was just one problem. Pearlman didn't own a blimp. That didn't stop him from signing a contract with Jordache that leased out Airship Enterprises' non-existent blimp to the New York-based clothing company. Pearlman took the money he received from Jordache and used it to build the blimp he had already leased to them. Though the order of operations here seems backward, it worked out pretty well for Pearlman. That is, until the blimp crashed shortly after he delivered it to Jordache. And after 7 years of hard-fought lawsuits, Pearlman was awarded $2.5 million in damages. Indeed, a scummy start to Pearlman's business dealings, but it was only just the beginning of the shadiness that was to come. Pearlman rebranded, starting a new company called Airship International. He needed to raise $3 million to purchase a blimp for the business and did so by taking the company public, claiming to partner directly with his old German friend. In reality, Theodore had no association with Airship International. He moved operations down to Orlando, Florida in 1991, scoring deals with big-time companies like SeaWorld and MetLife. The business was thriving. Airship stock had ballooned up to as much as $6 a share at one point. But the good times didn't last long. One of their major clients ended their partnership and 3 of their blimps crashed. Shortly after, Airship International closed its doors. It became clear in the years that followed that Pearlman's blimp leasing business was not playing by the rules. Pearlman grew very close to a stock trader named Jerome Rosen. Rosen then started trading Airship International stock when it was on the rise. That was not a coincidence. You see, Rosen was pumping and dumping shares of Airship stock. For those who aren't fluent in stock trading, a form of securities fraud called pump and dump entails pumping up a company's stock to seem better and more valuable than it actually is to potential investors. Once they've gotten people to take the bait, they dump the stock by selling it for much more than they bought it for. Rosen took part in this sleazy practice on Airship International's behalf for years before the company ultimately went under. Pearlman was paying him pretty well, with some accounts describing tens of thousands of dollars per trade winding up in Rosen's pocket. With a couple of failed blimp enterprises under his belt, Perlman made his return to music. Inspired by the success of his cousin Art Garfunkel, Perlman surveyed the landscape of the music industry and identified one brand in particular that was making serious 90s waves. The Massachusetts-based boy band New Kids on the Block had exploded onto the scene in the 80s and managed to remain extraordinarily popular into the early 90s. While boy bands had existed for decades by the time New Kids on the Block came around, they reached heights of commercial success previously unheard of in the genre. Perlman took note. He created his very own record company, Transcontinental Records, with one goal in mind: duplicate the success that New Kids on the Block had achieved. Easier said than done, but Perlman was dedicated, and he struck gold with the label's first group, the Backstreet Boys, in 1993. The band was made up of 5 nobodies that Perlman discovered after dropping $3 million on a nationwide talent search. Perlman picked former New Kids on the Block manager Johnny Wright and his wife Donna to manage his brainchild. The rest, as they say, is music history. The Backstreet Boys catapulted to new levels of popularity and commercial achievement, quickly becoming the talk of the music industry and cultural icons in their own right. To this day, they are the best-selling boy band of all time, and their impact on pop culture in the 90s is undeniable. Even today, the Backstreet Boys have managed to remain relevant, and in 2019, they became the first boy band to top the charts in 3 different decades. It seemed like Perlman had caught lightning in a bottle. In 1995, he did it again. Perlman and the Wrights followed the exact formula to create another trendy pop group. They called this one NSYNC. The Justin Timberlake-led boy band propelled 5 more nobodies to the peak of stardom. The group sold 70 million records internationally before calling it quits in 2002. Though the band itself was short-lived, a few of the members, including Timberlake and Lance Bass, went on to enjoy hugely successful careers in entertainment thanks to their time as part of NSYNC. Perlman went on to manage several other successful groups under the Transcontinental umbrella. These included LFO, Take 5, US5, and the girl groups Solid Harmony and Innocence, which Britney Spears was briefly a part of early on in her career. None of these groups were as big as Perlman's 2 blue-chip boy bands, but they helped solidify Transcontinental Records as a major player in the music industry. The label was operating out of an expansive entertainment complex in Orlando that included a recording studio for their artists. At this point, Perlman looked like an absolute genius. He was the brains behind 2 of the most viral music sensations of the 1990s and helped many other successful musicians gain footing in the ultra-competitive industry. He was raking in the dough through his work at Transcontinental Records, and his lifestyle resembled that of the rock stars he helped create. Perlman would often invite his young protégés over to his house for wild pool parties. His mansion was otherworldly. A member of the boy band O-Town, which Perlman managed, said his estate was like Disneyland. A huge pool outfitted with the finest amenities, a private home theater for lavish movie nights, even a luxurious boat decked out with his very own jet skis. He would host his boy band apprentices at this massive estate for insane birthday parties and unbelievably expensive celebrations. Lou had fully committed to the showy lifestyle of a billion-dollar media mogul. He was known by the nickname Big Papa, and he took a special interest in the young teenagers that played in his bands. He would put the kids through something of a boy band boot camp, forcing them to practice for hours on end in the hot Florida summer until they could perform to his liking. His pursuit of fame and fortune knew no bounds. He even presented one of his clients, Sean Vanderwilt, with a fake gold record for a song that hadn't even been released, let alone gone gold. He thought the stunt would help increase sales and had no problem outright lying to an audience of 10,000 people to bolster the bottom line. If it hasn't become clear yet, Perlman was not one to follow the straight and narrow path. He was willing to bend the rules and the truth if it meant he and his brand would benefit. He proved this with his blimp business, and he continued to prove it as his career in the music industry skyrocketed. In 2002, he co-wrote an autobiographical get-rich-quick book called Brands, Bands, and Billions. Those were the tenets he lived by and the things he valued the absolute most in the world. It was a fast and loose way of living, but it was the only way he knew. But like all who ride like lightning, Perlman crashed like thunder. It seemed like everything was going swimmingly for Perlman and the successful boy bands he helped shape. The Backstreet Boys had exploded up the charts, so too had NSYNC, and the two star-studded groups were piling up the record sales for Transcontinental Records. In the late 90s, however, Perlman got hit with a heap of lawsuits, many of them from the very bands he created, including the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. To the outside world, this was a bit of a shock. Why would members of these mega successful bands turn around and sue their manager? Weren't they bringing in tons of cash off the back of their music sales as it is? As it turns out, the bands were not being paid what they should have been paid. Perlman had been ripping them off, pocketing disproportionate sums of the band's profits and only tossing a few measly crumbs the musicians' way. The groups Perlman managed knew something was up. As the members of NSYNC recounted, Perlman invited them to a fancy dinner celebration after the band had been out on the road touring their album for 2 years. They received their first check that night. The amount? Only $10,000. That's right. The teenage musician's reward for 2 years of tireless work and endless traveling was a meager $10,000. That calculated out to less than minimum wage for 2 years of labor. The bands and their families were understandably outraged, and the lawsuits quickly followed. Perlman had filled the band's contracts with complicated language that ultimately siphoned a large portion of the money that should have rightfully gone to the musicians themselves, but instead was rerouted to Perlman's bank account. Except for US5, all of the artists who signed with Perlman's record label ultimately brought the pudgy producer to court over their unfair compensation. Each one of those cases resulted in either the band winning the suit or the dispute being settled outside of court. If being buried in endless lawsuits wasn't enough of a bummer for Perlman, his whole music empire came crashing down in 2006. The FBI had been investigating Perlman's affairs at Transcontinental Records and the label's parent company, Transcontinental International, Inc., which Perlman also ran. The feds, along with state investigators in Florida, had uncovered a massive Ponzi scheme that Perlman had been overseeing for more than 2 decades, making it the longest-running such scam in the history of the United States. How was he able to get away with it for so long? The flash and glam of the boy bands Perlman managed blinded the outside world to the shadiness of Transcontinental's business practices. It ultimately helped Perlman run his scheme for over 20 years. The scheme itself followed the familiar Ponzi formula. Perlman convinced outside investors to dump their money into his company by promising grand returns. His investor pool, largely made up of Florida retirees, was enticed by Perlman's ability to talk a big game. Once the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC had gone supernova on Perlman's watch, more and more investors lined up to line his pockets. However, what seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity was nothing but lies and deception. Shockingly, Perlman's company did not actually exist on paper. He falsified financial documents and insurance contracts to ease investors' worries and even fabricated an entirely fictitious accounting firm to take out loans from various banks. Perlman used new investments to pay existing investors, and the whole cycle went round and round for years. It's been estimated that Lou Perlman defrauded a total of $1 billion from Transcontinental's funders, and more than $300 million of that sum is still missing to date. Perlman kept his circle of trust very tight, and many of the day-to-day employees that worked for him had no idea that their boss was a criminal. When the FBI came a knocking, they were coming after Perlman and 2 of his closest aides, Michael Crudell and Robert Fischetti. But Perlman wasn't home to answer the door. Big Papa was long gone, having caught wind of the FBI's imminent arrival and fled the country as quickly as he could. He first went to Germany to evade his would-be captors. The FBI ripped apart every inch of his Orlando estate looking for evidence, money, and valuables, but their search came up empty, and they didn't find a single thing worth using against Perlman. The feds then ransacked the Transcontinental offices, and everything started to make sense. Perlman's company was a total con on every level. He had personally overseen every aspect of the large-scale scam, making phony documents on fake letterhead himself. Perlman even took a picture of a model airplane and passed it off as a real one to convince investors to fund Transcontinental Airlines. You name it, he lied about it. And the feds now had plenty of material to build a strong case against him. They just had to find him. He had disappeared into the wind, and investigators didn't have a clue where he was. Fortunately for them, the search for Perlman had made international headlines. A German tourist in Indonesia had seen Perlman's picture in the paper and swore he saw the fugitive at his hotel. That tourist eventually got connected with the FBI, and agents on the ground spotted Lou eating breakfast at the hotel bar. At the time of his arrest, Perlman was down to his last $10,000, the same amount he had once given NSYNC members for 2 years of touring. He was running out of money, and he had just run out of time. Lou's company was forced to file for involuntary bankruptcy shortly before his arrest. Many of his high-priced possessions and boy band memorabilia were sold at auction to recoup the money he owed. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison on May 21, 2008. The charges against him included money laundering and conspiracy. While in prison, his health steadily declined. He suffered a stroke in 2010 and was later diagnosed with a heart condition that required open-heart surgery. Just a few weeks after his operation, Perlman went into cardiac arrest and died in federal custody at 62. He still had 13 years remaining on his prison sentence. The boy band mogul's legacy has lived on without him, not only due to the continued success of the musicians he helped create, but also because of the documentaries about his eventful life. In 2019, a feature-length doc called The Boy Band Con premiered on YouTube Premium after a showing at South by Southwest. The film takes an all-encompassing look at Lou Pearlman's life and the many scams he took part in. It was produced by none other than Lance Bass, a founding member of NSYNC, who also appears extensively throughout the documentary. As more and more details continue to be brought to light about Pearlman's unending lies, the very nature of his work in the music industry has been called into question as well. Some believe his nickname Big Papa was more than just an endearing pet name given to him by friends. There have been allegations that Lou was inappropriately involved with some of the young musicians he groomed into superstars, and that his grand pool parties were far from innocent get-togethers. Whatever Pearlman's real motivation was, he was able to keep up the charade for longer than anyone else in the history of the American Ponzi scheme. His prolific criminal activities have made him something of a legend in the years since his capture. The success of his brainchildren continues today, forever cementing the legacy of Lou Pearlman in entertainment history, no matter how crooked and evil his legacy was. Click here to watch one of these next videos.